I think it's fair to say that this is probably the pivotal weekend of 2024 at the domestic market, if not the global market, when we look at box office, because we've had an inconsistent time in terms of titles being available, titles performing well. We've had a couple of underperformers, but really, once we hit this mid-June spot with the release of Disney Pixar's Inside Out 2, we expect the entire industry to turn a corner. This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Uria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition, joined once again by my colleague and co-host, Rebecca Pauley, deputy editor at Box Office Pro, in the first of our CineEurope podcast series. We've got the preview episode this week, sponsored by Tapos from Jackro and Cinity from Christie. You'll be hearing a lot more about those sponsors throughout the coming weeks. But in this week's feature segment, we are joined by the leaders of UNIC, the European Cinema Trade Association, Phil Clapp and Laura Houlgatte, joining us once again to preview CineEurope 2024, the biggest exhibition in the European cinema market. I'm excited to finally make my grand return to Barcelona. Hopefully I don't get COVID on the flight this time because, wow, it was rough going last time, Rebecca.
And shout out to our colleague Russ Fisher for stepping in and going last year because your baby had literally just been born. Within hours.
Within hours, like days, actually.
Well,
but no, we do appreciate Russ Fisher stepping in for that Barcelona coverage last year. This year, I'm going to be going over the schedule at the tail end of the news segment, Rebecca, because there's a lot to go over, including some cinema closures from a major dine-in circuit, unfortunately.
Unfortunately so, and bankruptcy in the mix there as well, though that one is not so bad as it sounds in particular. What we are talking about is Alamo Drafthouse, obviously dine-in chain based in Austin, Texas, been an absolute fixture in the Texas cinema scene for decades and then has since expanded out. We have 3 in New York. They're opening new cinemas all the time. 6 of those cinemas will be closing, 5 of them in the city of Dallas. That's all 5 of the Alamo cinemas in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, and 1 in Woodbury, Minnesota. The statement we got from Alamo is, we are very disappointed to learn today that our franchisee, which operates 5 locations in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, and 1 in Woodbury, Minnesota, has filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy and is closing their business effective immediately. We are heartbroken for the franchisee's teammates and the local film communities. However, we are working as quickly as possible to get Alamo Drafthouse Cinema back up and running in these cities. All other Alamo Drafthouse locations are operating as normal with continued expansion plans across the country. So, I think on the Alamo side, on the corporate side, they're looking to get back into Dallas as soon as is feasible and it makes sense for them. You can't have a Dallas without an Alamo location.
On the U.S. side of the news, Rebecca, we got an interesting press release from our friends over at AMC Theaters, the number 1 circuit in the country, offering tips on how to save on your way to the movies. We've been saying price sensitivity has been just such a big stumbling block, especially right now for moviegoers. It looks like AMC is getting ahead of that. What was the details of what they sent over?
It's interesting because as we get press releases in all the time, which is a good thing because we need to know what's going on in the industry, sometimes you're like, is this really news? Like, this isn't really news. This is just AMC listing 8 programs that it does to save money. But then you look at it again and you reframe it in the way of, we've been talking about how movie theaters need to get better at communicating directly with moviegoers about all the ways that there are to see movies, about all the ways that there are to save money on tickets. And that is what AMC has done. They have sent out a list, real crisp 8 bullet points. Here are all the ways that you can save money in our theaters this summer, whether that's the kind of classic series that introduces, whether that's just through being a member of their subscription program or their loyalty program. Discount Tuesday was another one. There's also a concessions bundle built into that. Matinee pricing every day before 4 p.m. There's the summer camp series, $3 per ticket plus tax for a selection of children's movies. They have Screen Unseen, which is surprise movies, upcoming movies that you don't know what it is before you get there. I always love the danger of that. I love it. I like to live dangerously. And then the closing that out with the AMC Fan Fave series, which is $5 for some recent classic films. And then, of course, just giving an AMC gift card or giving someone else an AMC subscription. It really, I mean, if you look down this list, it gives people a really good overview of how you can see the movies you want to see without breaking the bank, particularly if you're looking at a family situation, because obviously that's the area in which the costs can ramp up for households. But yeah, it's a good move on AMC's part to amp up communication, I think, on that way, communicating directly with moviegoers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important for theaters right now to do two things. One, advertise your amenities. You invested in them. So if you just installed laser projection, let people know you've got laser projection. If you've got recliner seating, let people know you've got recliner seating. And then if you've got discount opportunities, either on matinees or on special programming the way AMC does, let people know. People do want to go to the theaters. If you keep on hearing that price sensitivity is a factor, you have to do a better job at advertising how you're addressing those challenges. A lot of theaters have these discount programs. A lot of theaters have subscription to make it more affordable for people to go to the movies more often. But there's that gap in letting people know that you have to market the experience, not just the movie coming out next weekend. So I especially like that AMC put its best foot forward in advertising that part of their brand. Now let's move over to the European side of the equation, Rebecca, because you're interviewing the leaders of UNIC, Phil Clapp and Laura Houlgatte, in this week's feature segment. But before we do have some catch-ups here on the unique side of the universe. We just released our 2024 Giants of European exhibition. Not a huge shakeup in the top circuits across Europe. Familiar faces in the top three.
Number 1 and 2 on the list, we have Odeon. Of course, AMC is the parent company of Odeon. And then in the number 2 spot, Cineworld Group, parent company of Regal. Down at number 3, we have Vue International, which is headquartered in the UK but has cinemas across different European territories, as do Cineworld and Odeon. At number 4, the largest cinema chain in Europe that is not based in the UK, our friends at Pathé Cinemas in France. And then down at number 5, it's a circuit in Turkey that used to be called Cinemaximum. So if you're familiar with Cinemaximum, they're a subsidiary of CJCGV, the South Korean company that does it all. Paribu Universe is what they're called now. So
Cineverse, I think. Paribu Cineverse. That's what I'm
Paribu
saying.
Cineverse. Yes,
Let's
you're
go
right.
with
You're
that.
right.
That's a better name than Cinemaximum, if you ask me.
As you mentioned earlier, Daniel, there's really not a ton of changes on the top 50 list, Giants of European exhibition. Both the order and the companies that are on the list tend to be pretty consistent from year to year. So we really had to highlight, or rather our parent company, box office company, had to highlight Omniplex Group in Ireland, because over the last year, they went from 265 screens to 342. Like, they added 77 screens over this past year, which is more than anyone else. It's a very big jump. So they are being given the fastest moving giant award for having just a really good year. And then there are also breakthrough awards being given to a trio of cinema chains that are on the list this year that were not on the list last year. Thus, it's called the Breakthrough Award. That would be in Spain, ACEC, CineEurope. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so I do apologize. Real Cinemas, REEL, based in the UK, and in France, Noé Cinemas.
So we're excited to catch all of our colleagues over in Barcelona for CineEurope next week. But before next week starts, we do have to talk about the coming weekend at the box office. After a great performance from Bad Boys, Ride or Die, over its opening weekend in the last frame, we've got the second part of the 1-2 punch. Inside Out 2 from Disney is expected to be a real contender to be the first $100 million opening weekend of the year. To find out more about what we're expecting this weekend from the domestic market box office, please stay tuned after this message from our sponsor.
We are witnessing a growing trend of audiences seeking premium large format auditoriums. As directors experiment with new visual storytelling techniques, moviegoers want to experience what's next. 3D, 4K, 120 FPS high frame rate is just the beginning. CineEurope, the newest PLF system, delivers a wide color gamut, ultra high brightness, and high dynamic range combined with immersive audio that launches your audience into the story. With a steady stream of CineEurope formatted content in the near future, be sure to find out more at CineEurope2Infinity.com.
And we are back here on our forecasting segment here on the Box Office Podcast. We are joined by Romeo Duchesne, my colleague at the Box Office Company, and one of our industry panelists in the Box Office panel of forecasters, industry veterans that have direct experience working with these numbers on an industry-wide level. Romeo, you're coming to us via Sony and Universal, doing a lot of the forecasting in Europe for those two studios. And we are looking now at a Disney title, the first title of 2024 to receive a wide release under the Disney banner. Let's remember that so far in the entire first half of 2024, under Disney, hasn't released a single new movie. It had 3 re-releases of movies that were previously available on Disney Plus that had never been out to theaters. They released one each month in the first 3 months of the year in a very limited screen count. I think it was a total of or a maximum of 1,500 screens for that trio of titles. Obviously, coming back into the fray with a massive wide release. And Romeo, I think it's fair to say that this is probably the pivotal weekend of 2024 at the domestic market, if not the global market, when we look at box office, because we've had an inconsistent time in terms of titles being available, titles performing well. We've had a couple of underperformers, but really, once we hit this mid-June spot with the release of Disney Pixar's Inside Out 2, we expect the entire industry to turn a corner. We saw a preview of that with the overperformance, relatively speaking, of Bad Boys Ride or Die last weekend, and we expect this to be the second part of a 1-2 punch. Is it fair to say that the success or failure of Inside Out 2 is really going to dictate the way we look at not only the summer, but the year at the global box office?
This is so true, Daniel. And first of all, happy to talk to you, especially this weekend, because as you can say, it might be the first biggest weekend of the year. So great to talk to you during this period. But yeah, I think everyone is waiting Inside Out too. But let's not forget that Disney didn't click every time on that window, this June window. I think they tried on with Lightyear, and they didn't open at their expectation. But yes, everyone is waiting for Inside Out 2. The first one was released pre-pandemic, years ago, the pre-pandemic. And for some comps, it's easy for this one. Now we can quote the first one, obviously, that opened at $90 million here in the US.
$90 million.
For a total
$90 million.
90.
How long ago was that? Was that in 2015? Just shy of that $100 million opener. 2015 was the original release, no?
2015 or 2016, yeah, but it was from another time.
Yeah, different era. Yeah, I'm just confirming here. 2015, $90 million domestic opening weekend for that first Inside Out. That movie ended up playing to $356 million domestically. Now, expectations for this sequel are very, very high. But as you mentioned, Romeo, it is by no means a guarantee. Let's go over the history of the Disney Pixar mid-June release slot since the pandemic, because it's been an underwhelming, to put it nicely, but concerning, if we want to be realistic, track record of how these Pixar releases have been treated in the market in that mid-June release date since Disney went back to theatrical releases for these Pixar titles. Now, we have to remember that the last animated film from Disney Pixar to hit the market was in February 2020, the release of Onward, which was interrupted by the pandemic. I think it had about 3 weeks of a clean run before it was shoved out of theaters because of cinema closures that premiered early on streaming. And then the next 3 Disney titles ended up going straight to Disney Plus. We didn't get a return to theatrical releases until mid-June of 2022 with the Toy Story spinoff Lightyear. That was a massive disappointment. It was a $50 million opening weekend, well below expectations back in 2022, ending up with the lowest ever performance for a Pixar title to have enjoyed an uninterrupted wide release. So obviously Onward is the lowest performing theatrical run domestically for Disney Pixar. But since we've got a very credible asterisk there, the only one to run unabated was Lightyear. It ended up at a very disappointing $118 million total. The following year, the news wasn't much better. We had another mid-June release. This time it was for Elemental, which ended up tying Toy Story from 1995 for the lowest opening weekend for a Disney Pixar title. That's $29 million. So a really inconsistent track record here in the post-pandemic era. Of course, Elemental ended up legging out to do, I think, decently well in the market, but the expectations are going to be rewritten entirely with this release of Inside Out 2. We are currently expecting, according to our box office forecasting panel, an opening weekend between 85 and 115 million. Now, usually our opening weekend ranges aren't that wide, but we have a lot of expectations on this title to reach an overperformance potential. That's why we raised that ceiling here ahead of opening weekend to give us a $100 million plus performance that not even the original Inside Out was able to accomplish back in 2015. So really the standard here, Romeo, is for this title to match, come close, or exceed the first Inside Out for 2015. Do you think personally it gets there?
My personal figures is ranging between 8 and 92. And what I'm seeing on the trailer international tracking tool that we have here is that there is absolutely no doubt it's going to be above Kung Fu Panda 4 that did like 58. It's going to be above Elemental, no doubt also. And it's going to be also above Lightyear. So of course, there's a big gap between the 55, 60 million opening weekend that I mentioned to 100. But I can also say that it's going to be definitely lower than Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4 was tracking way higher than that, and it opened at $121 million opening in the US. So I think it's going to be lower than that. So
that's
why
basically your range, and I think that's aligned with what the rest of our panel is looking at, right? It's about $85 million plus, I think, is a base for this to perform along expectations. And then on a ceiling, you're looking at that 120 million from Toy Story 4, saying, listen, that's pre-pandemic. That's the fourth part of the Toy Story franchise. We highly doubt it's going to cross that $120 million mark, which puts us in that $85 to $115 million range for Inside Out 2. It has to be said, Romeo, this would end up being, if it hits our expectations, the highest opening weekend of 2024 at minimum. Because right now the record is, I think, very attainable. We've got in second place Kong x Godzilla with $80 million opening weekend. And then Dune 2, the number one opening weekend of 2024 so far with 82.5. This should be a shoo-in to get that crown. And I do have to repeat it. Let's maybe not put that $100 million expectation just yet. It'll be fine if this hits 85 million. But there's real potential here, Romeo, for this to be the first $100 million of the year. I don't see any other title that opened before this movie to have that. And even after this movie, I'm not sure anyone's going to have that runway, at least in a 3-day range, in a 3-day Friday, Saturday, Sunday range to hit that $100 million opening weekend benchmark. If we get it in the summer, this has to be the title before Deadpool Wolverine.
Yeah. And on our side, if we look at the pre-sales, we're like 3-4 days before the release date, before Friday. At the same time, at the same period, we're already exceeding Kung Fu Panda 4 pre-sales. So with a couple of days in advance. So it's already a good sign.
Yeah, I think we're both very positive on this movie to be one of the not only top earners of the summer, but of the year. It can't come soon enough. Of course, we had a difficult April, a difficult May. That narrative starts shifting with the great performance of Bad Boys Ride or Die, which opened at $56.5 million domestically last weekend. Really, I think in the high end of our range. I think when we recorded last week's podcast, we said it probably top out around 55 million. We revised that to 60 million once our article was available at boxofficepro.com, and it did exactly that. It passed the $55 million mark, under 60 million. A great start for Bad Boys Ride for Life in the market last weekend. We expect another strong hold because there's no direct competition for the Sony action title, a range of $28 to $35 million in its second week hold. A solid 1-2 punch here at the box office, and it's going to have to be because 43% of the showtimes of this coming weekend are dedicated to Inside Out 2. That number might climb by the time this episode reaches you on Thursday morning. And in second place on that showtimes listing is Bad Boys Ride or Die with 15%. Those two titles having nearly 60% of the showtime market share in North America. That's telling you something on what exhibition is expecting this weekend. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention some of that international performance from Sony's Bad Boys Ride or Die, setting new franchise records for the biggest regional opening of all time in both Latin America and the Middle East, with $10 and $9.5 million respectively. Top markets in those two regions, Mexico leading the pack with 4.2 million in Latin America. And in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia grabbing 3.7 million. Great opening weekend of that franchise over in the Middle East. Romeo, Bad Boys is doing well. We're expecting Inside Out 2 to do well. It's looking finally like we're going to have a pretty good summer. Of course, there's a little bit of a down weekend on the June 21st frame. And then June 28th, we've got A Big Gamble with Horizon and American Saga Part 1. And a good, decent performer. I think we're all expecting Quiet Place Day 1 to keep on this positive momentum going into July.
Well, it's great to see you smile again, Daniel.
It's been a while, right? I mean, after the last 2 months of box office that our colleagues in exhibition has had to deal with, things are certainly picking up. Well, Romeo, thank you so much for your insights this week. And coming up next after the break, my colleague, Rebecca Pauley, interviews the leadership over at UNIC, the European Exhibition Association. We've got Laura Houlgatte and Phil Clapp previewing CineEurope, which is coming up next week.
As a cinema, it's frustrating when your success is decided by things you can't control. Hollywood hits come and go. What stays the same are the amazing experiences you offer your customers, whether it's an engaging and successful membership program, seamless seat upgrades, next-level food and drink, or extras like arcade games and bowling. But to do this well, you need a POS system that can keep up. Tappos has been developing cinema software for over 25 years. They know what it takes to run a successful movie theater, and they've created a solution that can match your boldest ambitions. Learn more at taposapp.com.
I am joined here today with Laura Houlgatte and Phil Clapp of the UNIC in the run-up 1 week until CineEurope. I know you guys must have a lot on your plate at the moment, so thanks for taking the time to chat with us about what people can expect in Barcelona this year.
Hi there.
One of UNIC's main initiatives, and one of the things that I find really interesting, you do a lot of work into data and using analytics to really dig into the state of the film industry across the 39 markets that UNIC represents. You put out a paper today that was with Europa Cinemas and the International Confederation of Art House Cinemas, which it looks like a really interesting impact report. But that's different from the UNIC report, is what you put out every year, the first year of CinemaCon, right? So I know everything's under embargo, but what can you give us in terms of kind of like a macro view of how the European cinema industry has fared over the last year?
Sure. So I'll kick off, and then Laura, who's been much closer to today's report, can maybe give you an assessment of where that fits in. I mean, the reality is that when we gather at CineEurope every June, we're reflecting in the main on the performance in the previous year and the data we have for the first 3 months of this year. And the data for last year is on the whole very, very positive across the territories covered by UNIC. We saw almost 990 million admissions, so that's up just short of 22%, and equally almost a 24% increase in box office to 7.2 billion euros. And within that data, inevitably, there are some high flyers and some slightly less high flyers. So if you look at the Netherlands, that was 31% up on box office, Croatia 25%, Germany 24%, France 19%, and Italy is probably the most astonishing. That was 62% up on box office, just shy of €500 million at box office.
Flashing back to a year or two, or even recently, I mean, the Italian cinema market was really not doing well at all in kind of that immediate post-pandemic period. And to hear that they've bounced back so hard this past year, that's really great.
Yeah, and it's the result of a lot of work by a lot of hands, if you'd imagine. Certainly, there was a lot of work to try and address the Italian summer issue, as it was, around the kind of slightly circular argument that people didn't go to the cinema in the summer, so therefore films weren't released, and films weren't released, so therefore we wouldn't go. Also, there's investment in the infrastructure in Italy. But, that's a high flyer amongst a number of high flyers. And then as we look at the first few months of this year where we have data, undoubtedly this year has been more of a challenge. I think it's fair to say, and we're talking about lower percentage increases. So, the Netherlands is up 4% on box office compared to the first quarter of last year. Mm-hmm. Italy, 10%, etc. And so the aim is to give as honest a reflection of the picture as possible, and clearly no discussion of the last 12 months can be had without mentioning the term Barbenheimer. And so I think, almost aside from the numbers, if you can do that, what I think the message will be around the fact that when the content's there, the customer is there, essentially. And obviously we saw at the back end of last year the impact, which impacted differently on different European territories of the strikes in the US. And undoubtedly this year is more of a challenge because that slate is a little thinner. There's not the regular drumbeat of big titles, certainly in the first quarter, first kind of third of the year maybe. So it's about providing as upbeat, but also kind of accurate picture of the last 12 months or so to delegates. And recognizing that, of course, the majority of delegates there are people who are interested in the European sector, but also have an understanding that there's a global sector outside of that.
On the positive side, Laura, some countries had their best summer ever.
That's right. Yeah, we had a number of countries. Who had their best summer ever. So we, talked about the Netherlands, but we also had Norway, we had Italy. So it was great to see. I mean, and this is something that we've seen again across a number of countries. But of course, the second part of 2023 was a bit more challenging. It's fair to say. But this didn't stop us having great numbers in 2023. And just to come back on the report that you mentioned in your introduction that we've published with Europa Cinemas and the CineEurope, the idea was for us to give a 360 degrees perspective on European cinemas, and our three organizations together represent 99% of the EU market. And this year, where we're going to welcome a new European Parliament and a new European Commission, the idea was to have a welcome letter, which is more than just a letter. It's about 25
a welcome
page
PDF,
but basically highlighting exactly, but basically highlighting everything that makes European cinemas so special, and how and why they should be supported and celebrated by policymakers.
And one of the things, that I find so fascinating is the diversity within the cinema industry in wider Europe. Definitely when you look at the local film industries of various countries, of various regions, I imagine that those local films were a huge help as the effects of the strike on the pipeline kind of hit last year. What are some of the countries that have had high grosses with their local films this year? What are the standouts?
Well, I think just to name a couple, Finland did very well. So if you look at the top 10 titles for the first quarter of 2024, 6 out of 10 were local films. So that's a market share of 52%, which is massive. But it also meant that if you compare the first quarter of 2024 to the first quarter of 2023, Finland was plus 31%, which is quite an achievement given the slate that we had. In Poland, we had a record-breaking documentary that was released, and we know it's a genre that is usually much more challenging, but that did absolutely great numbers. And then we talked about Italy, the Italian miracle. Well, that continued in the first quarter of 2024 because they were basically on par with the same period of 2023, and they managed to reach a share of local content of 27.5%. So that's great news. Again, it's testament to the strength of European content and its diversity. But we should keep in mind that it's not the case for all European territories. And again, that we need all type of content to get our audiences in. And local content can't make up for the loss of US titles. So we need all of these basically on the big screen.
Just before I talk about Italy, what I of course forgot to mention in all of the many hands that helped the Italian market was one film, which is There's Still Tomorrow, which just did astonishing business, outstripped both Barbie and Oppenheimer in Italy, and in most European territories, one or both of those films were in the top two. So it's certainly the case, and it's even started, the UK, we'll talk about that in a moment. The UK is not a territory which typically takes non-English language European films, and that film's had some success in the UK in recent weeks. I mean, the issue for the UK is a structural one, which is a conversation which has been ongoing in our industry for the last decade or more, which is around we suffer, as it were, because we share a language with the US. So our customers or audiences aren't able, sometimes intentionally, to distinguish between American films and British films as well as they might. But actually, there are some issues around the supply line, as it were, of audience-friendly British films, which certainly are starting to cause some conversations across the industry. There's no lack of appetite amongst, UK cinema operators to show British films. It's just that there aren't the British films available, and when they are available, they tend to come with insufficient marketing budgets, so they don't cut through with audiences. There are signs of kind of change. There are signs of a realization of these issues. So I'm as hopeful as I can be that if we were having the conversation again in 2 or 3 years' time, and clearly these things are a slow burn, we might be in a better position we are now. Just before they called the election in the UK, our government announced a new tax credit for independent British films, which I think will help unlock a good deal of finance and a good deal of effort in that regard.
Definitely one of the major lessons of the last year, talked about already in this interview. We just need more films. We need more of a variety of films. Phil, I was wondering, what are the other lessons maybe that you've taken from 2023?
I think you can't move far away from the issues of content and the slate and the diversity of the slate and the marketing of those films, because clearly not all films are going to cut through with audiences, but by general kind of agreement, there have been some films that probably deserved a better response from audiences, but audiences either weren't aware they were available or didn't know when they were in cinemas, etc. And I think we probably post-pandemic collectively have a job of work to do to remind people around the exclusivity that many films enjoy in cinema. We're still in a number of territories kind of experiencing some of the cost of living issues, and those cut on both sides. Those both cut in terms of the audience's ability to spend and willingness to spend, but also on the cinema operator side, of course, they cut in terms of energy costs and staffing costs, etc. So, no one's expecting sympathy from audiences, and I think there's a recognition that you can only push the price of tickets so far before you start to impact on that. But there is an understanding, I think, that if cinemas are providing a quality product, and quality not just in terms of the film, but in terms of the experience, then audiences are willing to pay. It's very telling, and you can't draw too many lessons from Oppenheimer and Barbie, because clearly they were kind of a unique cultural moment, but the extent to which industry PLF, so IMAX and other large screens and other premium experiences, they sold out first, does suggest that customers are willing to pay. But we're very conscious, I say this as a UK trade body head, but also with Laura working across a number of European territories, that premiumization is not just about big screens. It's not just about recliner seating. There are a large number of smaller operators for whom those things aren't within reach, but who undoubtedly offer a premium experience. So we need to ensure that the cinema experience remains something which gets people out of the home and where people feel they're getting value for money. And that comes in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah, whether it's the huge screen or something like Everyman Cinemas, where it's more boutique and it just feels a little bit more upscale. Another side of that cost-benefit equation is the cinema industry as traditionally a great place for people to have first jobs, for people to have summer jobs. It's a fun industry to work in. And Laura, I wanted to ask you about this People program. I know it's something that was launched last year. But for maybe those who didn't attend the show last year, what is this People program, and what are sort of going to be the issues that you're dealing with this year?
Sure. So we basically launched this initiative last year in response to a challenge that was identified by our members across almost all territories that they operate in, which was about attracting and retaining talents in the industry. So as you said, it used to be very easy, or easier anyway, to attract people because cinemas were selling that kind of, dream job idea, but it has become increasingly challenging, especially in a post-COVID world where the expectations were around work-life balance and what you should accept from a job have been very different. And we wanted to provide members and partners with tools that they could use because we're very conscious that our membership is very diverse, both geographically, but also in terms of sizes. So we do have members that are very small. They don't have a dedicated HR department. They have limited resources. So what could we give to them that they could implement easily in their company that could make a difference? And together with the advisory board led by Diva City, so from View International, we feel as vice chair. We also have Katrina Phoebe from Kinopolis, who's supporting us on marketing, and Nevena Brasena from Cineplex, just to make the difference, who's supporting us in events. I know there's
the
too many
Cineplex
out there. We basically worked around work streams, that could make a difference when you talk about attracting and retaining talents. And the first topic we tackled following a survey was on internal culture and values. And we basically launched podcasts, newsletter. We had a workshop dedicated to that issue. And we're going to publish a very practical toolkit at CineEurope that will be presented on Wednesday, 19 June, and presented by Zara Doyle, who's also on board and who's been specifically supporting us on designing this toolkit. And the next topic we're going to launch is leadership skills. So the idea is basically you can't tackle everything at the same time because we also have limited resources. There's only so much we can do. So we decided to tackle a different topic every year. And in the hope that we will bring to the table things that can be used, not just by our members, but everyone that works basically in the industry, and that they can use at their level to ensure that we have people who not only want to work in the industry, but who want to stay in the industry. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who also allow us to bring customers in.
It's a great stepping off point, I imagine, for people to talk about things that they've implemented and kind of bounce ideas off one another. Yeah, I'm really excited to see that report because it's definitely retaining talent is definitely an issue here in the US as well, across a lot of industries, not just cinema.
Of course, absolutely.
So in addition to that People program launch, I know it's always tough. What are some of the CineEurope programs that you're looking forward to? Because I know you just want to list everything. But what are some of the highlights for you?
Those of us, and I probably now count Laura in that group, who've been through successive CineEurope, clearly conscious of the fact that some issues kind of bubble to the top most years and don't always get resolved. And I sometimes make a joke about the fact that, there's always a point at CineEurope where someone says there should be more data sharing between exhibitors and studios. Everyone agrees it's a good thing. And then we come back a year later and that conversation continues. We can say, actually, there's one of our focus sessions is being delivered by colleagues from View who are being very open and transparent, I think, in terms of the success they've had in sharing data. And I think given the challenges that this year has presented and probably will continue to present for a while, we all need to be open to new ideas and new approaches and recognize the partnership we have with colleagues in distribution. So that, for me, I'll be very interested to hear what they had to say, off away from the seminar kind of rooms, as it were. We've always been keen, and we're on a journey, to be perfectly honest, to bring more European film content to the table. So this year we've got Bonhoeffer from colleagues at Angel Studios. We've got Parthenope, which is the Paolo Sorrentino film, both in the evening, but hopefully to be well attended. So sitting alongside and entirely complementary to the kind of titles which, either Fly Me to the Moon from Sony and Apple or Speak No Evil from Universal colleagues, which are entirely of a piece in terms of seeing films early, genuinely early, and hopefully adding a little bit of variety and a little bit of kind of conversation points to the days.
And I think for me, it would be probably the session on new cinema concepts. So we decided to bring together 3 very different concepts on the Monday morning. So one is about cinemas as entertainment center. So where you can also play bowling and just have, all these places where you can do very different things. But we're also going to have the concept of a private cinema. So literally, you rent a cinema for 5 to 8 people in a very cozy room and you decide what you want to watch. That's coming to us from the Netherlands. And then from France, we've been talking about it for quite a number of years, but we finally have the very first Oma cinema opening. And we've all seen
I
the
need to
pictures.
see it in person.
We've all seen what
It looks so amazing.
Exactly, but now we will see what it actually looks like in real life.
This was Rebecca's bid for a field trip from box office to go and see that cinema.
And I've been there myself. I've been very lucky because they've opened just nearby Cannes. So during the film festival, I managed to pop by there, and it's really impressive. So I think it's going to be great for people to actually see the picture, proper pictures in real life, and not just a simulation. So I'm looking forward to that. And as Phil mentioned, I think we have a diversity as well of slates and titles that we're bringing to people this year. And I'm hoping that, there'll be something for everyone, which is what we're trying to bring.
And that was Rebecca Pauley speaking with UNIC's Laura Houlgatte and Phil Clapp. Earlier in this episode, you heard from Romeo Duchesne from the Box Office Company, offering you the latest insights of our box office forecasting panel. Please join us next week for the second part of our CineEurope podcast series, that episode coming to you out on Thursday. On behalf of Rebecca, myself, and the entire team over at Box Office Pro, thank you so much for supporting the Box Office Podcast, and we'll talk to you again next week.